moment when O'Brien shows up, because as Hugh describes it, O'Brien says, well, why didn't you call me? How could you not have called me? He said, well, I thought you'd be upset, that you'd say, you know, you're in college now. You know, what do I have to do? And he said, well, why would you think that, given the bonds that we've had? He said, well, that's what's happened in my life before, you know, that people sort of move on. And for him, it was an awakening that this was a different kind of relationship. And I think there is a really special relationship between the two of them, and that it got deeper after this. In this kind of crisis, it sort of it emerged to a different level. And I think, like a lot of people, Jack has sort of been focused on winning the next championship, working with the next group of guys coming in, and I think he realized that if you don't sort of follow through on what's happening in college with the players, that you can sort of lose track there as well, and that the sort of continuity is a very important point.
You know, I don't think that, and while, you know, I applaud Jack O'Brien for all that he's done in that vein. However, there are coaches all over this country, particularly when I've had the experience of coaching on a Division I level, and sometimes we don't like it when they do show up. And I don't mean that in a negative way. It's because they still have that hold that we're trying to get on, and that we want that relationship with that young person. I remember coming here to Boston in the early 70s, to a new place for me, and you know, my coach was here. You know, his goal was to make sure that this kid who he had to take to the airport for his first plane ride, you know, was okay in a place where the rest of the country thought wasn't such a nice place to be. I got standing ovations when I made it home from here during that period. And so, you know, it was a whole different experience, but you'll note this is something that you see. In fact, I still get those calls today to tell me how to run the university next door from, you know, coaches who were in my life. So people always talk about people coaching from the sidelines when they're coaching, but they like to coach you for the rest of your life as well. And that's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful part of the relationship.
Well, you and Sean were talking upstairs before we started about mentoring.
Yes.
And it strikes me from what you're saying now that maybe the most effective mentor understands the limits of what he or she has to do as a mentor. Maybe both of you could talk a little bit about the parameters of that relationship with a young person.
I think the hardest part is letting go.
Absolutely.
And allowing them to sort of grow up to a point where, you know, I met this young man when he was 14 years old, and it was through his mentor, who I was mentoring, who wanted to show me that he was completing the circle. Because in this, we have this thing that I told him as a 14-year-old, that we don't want anything from you. All we want from you is to complete the circle. How do you complete the circle? You complete it by doing what we've done for you. You make sure that you look out for all you owe me is to look out for some other young person, to have 5 minutes for somebody else, just like we have this 5 minutes for you today. And he understood that and went on to do that in his life. And so we know we can let go. And when he calls us, we'll answer the phone and we're there, but we're not going to be hovering over him and saying, hey man, and we'll see him in the paper and write him a note or something like that. But you learn to insert yourself when you have to, but get out of the way and let them grow and let them, you know, do what they need to do in order to continue to be successful. And you're just proud, you know, so.
And I think, the organization, I have my own nonprofit, which is Diamond Educators. It's a mentoring program dedicated towards young men who live in inner city neighborhoods of Boston or attend the Boston Public Schools. And I'm a huge advocate for mentoring, and I think it has played a huge role in my life and a lot of my friends. In starting the organization, I remember having a conversation with a friend who co-founded the organization with me, and we were just talking about, you know, how did we get to the point where we are today, especially when violence is so is running rampant through our community. And at the same time, when we were growing up, it was similar in the 90s. And the one thing that we had in common during that conversation was mentoring. So we thought, about, well, we need to do the same thing. Mentoring played a huge role in our life. Let's do the same thing and have an impact on these young men. And I tell a lot of the young men that I'm mentoring today that same story. I tell my mentor often, I will repay him back, and his thing has always been, you don't owe me anything. The only thing you owe me is, as Mr. Motley said, is to give back and make a difference in another young man's life, and that's what I have dedicated my life to doing. And like he says, that's the important thing, is to be able to know. I remember that day going to Northeastern when Mr. Motley was at Northeastern, and my mentor took me. It's the first time that I stepped foot on a college campus, which is it's sad, but I was a freshman, probably not even a freshman. I think I was a sophomore in high school, and it was the first time I stepped foot on a college campus. It wasn't even to see the campus; it was to meet this gentleman right here. And that,
call me a young man.
Yeah.
he was slipping up. Oh, this young man.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this was the first time that I met this young man, and it just had a huge impact on my life. Being the first time to sit on, I was just amazed. And it wasn't somewhere far out. It was Northeastern, but I didn't know. It was home. It was here in the city. It was a college campus, and just that connection and having another male role model in my life. Probably was the second man next to my mentor I seen in a tie. I often tell my young men, when I seen someone in a suit and tie growing up, that wasn't who I aspired to be. That was a square to me. He wasn't. That.
Now he's sharper than all of them.
So it just made me feel like, what, I can do this. I can wear a suit and tie. I can be successful. And it's the same thing that I preach to my young men. And it's the same thing. Once you don't owe me nothing, just repeat that cycle. And with Coach O'Brien is the same thing. Knowing, I think Mr. Motley, made a great point. Just knowing when to let go. But still, they're there when I need them, and I call them often. Whenever I'm getting ready, if I'm having difficult times with some of my young men that I'm dealing with now, whenever I'm getting ready to do a speaking engagement or whatever it may be, I always come back to them, and I think a lot of our young men need that.
We also, one final thing on that, we also let them know you have to earn that suit and tie.
Absolutely.
Because many of the young men come in your office and they think that they're you. They think they are going to sit right in your seat tomorrow. And so they walk in looking at you like they want to take your seat right away. And there's hard work that went into it. One of the things about the young man that he's thinking about is the image that he saw back then of this young guy sitting across from him that was trying to tell him, look, man, you're going to take our places. And so that part of the equation, he understood the hard work that it takes in order to be here. It's not going to just, be something that happens by osmosis or something.
Absolutely.
As some of you who haven't read The Assist may have gathered, a very strong current in the book involves how some students are able to use their extraordinary talent as basketball players as a gateway into educational opportunities that they might not, almost certainly would not otherwise have access to. And there's a lot of discussion about the extent to which that is a legitimate thing, and it's available in the book as well. But I wonder if maybe everybody on the panel, maybe starting with Michael, could speak to some of the reasons, some of the ways, some of the obstacles that young men face going to college, and why it's necessary for them to have something, in this case, in the case of this book, basketball, something that they can use to their advantage to get to college. Because I grew up in the suburbs. I got to college basically because, let us just say that my talents as an athlete had nothing to do with it. if I had to count on my talent as an athlete, I would still be filling out applications at this point. And so it was a very different route. But I think it would be great to hear a little bit about some of the things that some of these kids have to overcome, even if they're terrific athletes and have brilliant high school careers.
As some of you who have read the book know that I'm not brought up in this country. I actually came from a very privileged background. What shocks me when I first got involved in public education is how unfair the system is. Basically, in the United States, if you have a better job, your children, you have better housing. You have better housing, your children get better education, and in turn, you'll get better job in turn. So there's a vicious circle. One of the things that I was committed when I became a principal is to do something about it. Now, I'm not naive enough to want to change the world, but I think what can be changed is that if we can get the kids to go to college, then they can break out of that vicious circle of better education, better house, better job, and then better education for the children and all that stuff. So we make a commitment at Charles Hang from the very beginning that getting kids to college is our goal. I mean, from the very first day that I took over that school, the faculty are made aware of it. And that's one of the reasons why, for instance, at a district school like Charles Hang, it offered 10 AP classes, proportionally just as many as Boston Latin, who offer 24, but Boston Latin has 24,000 kids. We have about 1,100 kids. So what Coach O'Brien did is exactly the same thing, and that's why from the very beginning I said this guy is really good. He basically take whatever he has, work with those kids, and then make sure they take all the courses that are necessary and then go to the college. So it goes well, what he did goes very well with what the school wants. And that's one reason why he get a lot of support from the teachers, because the teacher also buy into that. The Coach O'Brien's success in terms of being a basketball coach, winning all those championships did not happen during his first 4 years at Charles Hang. But his success in terms of getting his players to college start from the very beginning. I mean, Sean Brown is a very good example. I mean, I don't think you won any championship, do you?
No.
Yeah, but he makes sure his players go to. Just want to rub it in.
But I take pride in letting them know that I started the whole thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Before I got there, Coach was 1-14. When I got there the next year.
Yeah. So that's the thing that we try very hard to do, and he was really successful in doing it.
Mm-hmm. And I just want to, one thing, I mean, Coach is good and basketball is good for getting a lot of young men and helping them with some of the obstacles that we do face in going to college. But what happens if there's not a Coach O'Brien? You know, and that's where a lot of our young men are falling through the cracks, because they're not getting these opportunities. They don't know anything about AP courses. I use myself as an example before Coach O'Brien came into my life. You know, I got by in high school just because I was a great athlete. I played football all 4 years in high school. I played 1 year high school basketball. I ended up going to college on a 4-year basketball scholarship. The only reason why I played 1 year of basketball, was because study hall. Study hall was mandatory. It was an hour before you practice. I wasn't trying to stay after school for an hour before practice. I was missing time from the block. I was missing time from being outside, seeing all the girls. I just wasn't trying to do study hall. So that was one factor. Also, grades. For football, all you had to do was pass the previous year to be eligible to play football. For basketball, grades came out. So if you didn't have the grades, you couldn't play. So, I tried out, by the time grades came, I got the hook. And also, it just goes back, like I said, not trying to spend that hour. So, in my junior year, Coach comes to the school. A lot of people tell him, he should talk to me. I'm a great athlete. This kid, he can really help you. He talks to me my junior year. He has a conversation. He says, Sean, I hear you're a great athlete. I want you to play for me. He said, but you have to change your attitude. You have to change your friends, and you got to change your grades. Just like I did everybody else. Okay, Coach, I will. Make a long story short, I didn't. That year, when it was time for tryouts, I went to tryouts. I'm doing my thing in layup line. I'm the best player in the school. One, I have that confidence, and just I'm showing it on the court. So what coach says, he says the next day there's going to be a list in the locker room. If your name's not on that list, if your name's on the list, you make the team, come back to practice. But the key is the list is going to be up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'd never seen 6 o'clock my whole high school. The last time I seen 6 o'clock in my high school years was probably in elementary. But that next day I was at school at 6 o'clock to see if my name was on that list. Went down to the locker room, looked on the list. No Sean Brown. Coach made a mistake. Maybe he just didn't want everybody to see, but I still made the team. So I come to practice. I'm in practice. Coach calls everybody. He says, I said, if your name's not on that list, do not come back. He says, everybody go back to doing layups. I go back in the layup line. He pulls everybody back again. I says, if your name's not on that list, don't come back. Leave. That was the first time through my high school career that someone stood up to me and made me realize just because I was a great athlete, I wasn't going to get away with anything. Because all through high school, I know I did. I didn't go to class. I told you the story about me and my friend in the hallways. I passed because I was a football player. My coach had connects, and that's the case for a lot of our young men today. They're just getting by because of athletics. They're not getting by what they do, and it's hurting them. And the way that hurted me is because when it was time to take those SATs, I remember coach just saying, you got to go take the SATs. We're going to give you a waiver. Just be here Saturday, wherever he told me to go, I got to be there Saturday to take this test. The first time I took the SATs, I got a 300. Now, if anybody knows the SATs, you get 200 for your name. No, and the point, I was just never taught how to take this test. Nobody, all through my, high school career, was never taught, this is SATs. If you don't understand, don't mark, the tricks of the trades. What happened during that year, I ended up playing for coach. I was at the movie theaters. I just have to tell you, I'm sorry, I just have to tell you this story. I was at the movie theater my junior year. At the movie theater, I was with my son. One of the things, I was at the movie theater with my son and my girlfriend, who is my wife now. In the bathroom, I had words with a rival gang. Once leaving the movie theater, they were outside in the lobby waiting, so I knew something was about to go down. We had words. The guy flashes a gun on me. Flashes a gun, shows me. At the same time, I have one on me, but I don't react because I have my son and my girlfriend with me. So all the way home, I'm just, thinking, I know who they are. I'm going to go back. We're going to take care of this. But on the way home, I just keep hearing something. Something keeps playing in my mind. Do you want your son to grow up without a father like you did? My father wasn't in my life because he passed away or anything. He just chose not to be. And I always made a promise to myself that my son would never grow up without a father like I did. Long story short, I call Coach O'Brien when I get home. Instead of calling my boys, I say, Coach, listen, I'm ready to make this change. His words were, Sean, don't BS me. I said, no, Coach, I'm serious. He said, meet me tomorrow morning at the Charlestown Navy Yard. I meet him. He works me out that whole summer, takes me to my first college campus, which was Merrimack College. Same thing. I have a great camp at Merrimack. I remember the coach asking me to stand up. Said, that's going to be my point guard of the future. From there, that was the first college coach who recruited me in basketball. I played my senior year. I had the honor roll. It was the first time I got the honor roll since elementary. And it was just due to coach and study hall. Study hall is a great thing because I got a lot of work done, but it was the first time I got the honor roll. I played. Colleges wanted to touch me. They couldn't. Boston College, I wanted to go to Boston College. My core academics, SAT scores just weren't permitted. So I ended up getting a scholarship to do 1 year at a prep school, postgraduate year at New Hampton Prep. Went to New Hampton Prep. They prepped me how to take the SATs. The first time I took the SATs, got an 820. So it's a big difference. And the point between that is just showing the difference between city education and basically, going to school out in the suburbs. And from there, I'll just cut it short. The SATs, go back to the SATs. The next time I took the SATs, I got a 980. Now I think I needed an 860 to pass in order to be eligible for the clearinghouse. I got a 980. It was the first time in my life now that I had control where I wanted to go. I had Division I offers I could have took. I choose to go to Division II because of my son, Merrimack College. But to make the long story short, I just wanted to make that comparison between the SATs and what I was taught. Being in prep school, being in the city. And if you're not in a program like such, and you don't have a Coach O'Brien, then our young men who don't have a Coach O'Brien are struggling. And I'm trying to be the mentoring and things like that. So, sorry.
I'm going to just give you a shot at this, Neil, because one of the things that comes across in this book very clearly is, we were talking about this upstairs as well. Lots of people, lots of writers have decided that it would be a terrific idea for a book to spend a season with a team. whether it's a basketball team or a hockey team or whatever it might be. What distinguishes this book, I think, is as much as anything else, is Neil's curiosity. It's not enough to be with the team. He follows kids home. He begins to understand the dynamic that some of these kids have with their mothers and with their family at large, and in some cases with their fathers, in some cases with fathers that they haven't had much to do with before. I want you to speak a little bit about perhaps what you discovered in the course of this adventure about what these kids had to overcome, because you lived it. Neil, some of it must have been news to you.
It definitely was, and I think I think the short answer is I came away with real admiration for these kids. As part of the story, I kind of had to follow the story wherever it went, but I became very sort of in my heart hoping that it would go well for all of them. But because I think I grew to appreciate what I think so few of us do appreciate. I think in many cases, especially around Boston, people stopped paying attention to urban education in the 70s when it was last sort of controversial, and for people who sort of checked out after that, they sort of just have this idea of it's over there, it's what it is, and it really doesn't affect me, and it does. And what you see in terms of the players, it starts out very basically. I mean, the players in this case are getting up. I know you said you never saw 6 in the morning at school, but these players are getting up at 5:30 to 6 in the morning to make an hour and a half commute to get to school and an hour and a half back, just to do that. And not only that, but often what I would see by I would make the commute with them. I would want to get up early in the morning to sort of be there as they were waking up. And I remember just sort of being there like, what are you doing here? Well, but they were sort of groggy enough themselves that they didn't seem to mind. And they sort of got used to that. But to see also sometimes the less logical route, sometimes their commutes were longer than they needed to be. We'd say, well, why aren't we going to this T station across the street from where you live? And well, that's not my neighborhood. And you sort of got an appreciation for these sort of boundary lines that were invisible to me and to most of us, I think, but unmistakable to these guys, that they had to sort of be aware of that. And what I came away at the end of 3 years with these players and their families was an appreciation for the number of smart, quick decisions that players, I say players on this, I'm talking about the guys, that they had to make every day. Smart, quick decisions about where to go, what to do, what to avoid, and just to get to school, and then to have to deal with the chaos often that you have to deal with in school, and all the sort of the things Sean was talking about what it's, the kind of perceptions about what you have to sort of overcome and how you can't be seen as looking soft and other things on there. So there are all these combinations kind of marbled into their days, and that's just to start an average day, if you think about that. So when you get through that, as they do, and as you see people like Sean and others who've gone through this and succeeded on the other side, you realize, even given the hurdles and the obstacles in their place, the advantages in terms of maturity that they have, having gone through that on their own with the decisions that they have to make to do that. So I think there's an important dynamic there of being given less and being expected a lot being expected of them, but then also having to once they get through it, to sort of really, I think, be at a place that makes up for a lot of the other sort of gaps.
There's another I think, very interesting moment in this book. Those of you who haven't read the book already, perhaps can understand from this conversation. The book is very intense, and the friendships and The relationships that are forged within the team are extraordinary. And yet, at the very end of the book, two of the young men who have played together on championship teams at Charlestown, Ridley and Robbie, are having a conversation. And these are guys who, day after day after day, they've gathered in this one guy's tiny bedroom. It's kind of the place where they all go and they play video games and they talk, and they're very comfortable, and there's always junk food around, and it's great, and it's safe is the amazing thing about it. It feels like a safe place. And they're talking, these two guys, and Robbie says of the circumstance when they're both a year out of high school, nobody calls anymore. The community of those kids doesn't seem to have lasted past the experience of being on a team together. Or did I misread that? Is it?
You know, it's interesting. I think the one thing that was a constant, and it gets more complicated towards the end of this this period that I was with them, but the one thing that was a constant was Charlestown basketball. That was the glue that kind of kept them together. These guys who hadn't known each other in elementary school and middle school in many cases, but sort of forged these intense bonds in high school. A lot of the players, when they'd come back from college in May, would come with their bags to the Charlestown gym before they'd go home, and they would be sort of playing against the younger guys. And I was always impressed with the kind of brotherhood that spanned the years with guys that they didn't even know necessarily, but they were all part of this fraternity of Charlestown basketball guys, and that was intense, and that seemed to sort of withstand the time. In this case, the particulars of this class, this senior class, got a little complicated. And that strained some of those bonds, but I think they still feel connected to Charlestown, and they still have those bonds, even if, as Robbie and Ridley were talking about, that the others, in this case, Ridley had done really well, and there was a sort of advantage that he had on there that if some of the other guys hadn't done as well, that there was fraying, I think, in those bonds. But once they got to the Charlestown gym, they were all right.
And Bill, I think that goes back to the question about the obstacles. I think that's, and I would like to speak just for young men in particular. I think that's an obstacle for a lot of them, is that support after high school. Because coach is great, as Mr. Molly says, but he still has to deal with the next group coming in. So what happens for those young men, who are now off to college? I think that's when mentoring comes in, and they're not getting that support at the next level. And for them, this is like their chess clubs for young men in the city. Like this is like their after school program. Whatever kind of club you want to talk about, this is the closest thing at there. And probably don't say it. It probably is going on in other schools, but not to the fact that it is here. But once they get to that next level, I think it's them building. Like Mr. Molly says, coach, let's go. But now they should have the skills, to, if they need, to ask, come back, give. And maybe that's, I think, that's the next step as far as having support and young men being successful at the next level, is learning to build that support network that's going to allow them to be. And that's something maybe that they should have already developed those skills and should start working on their own.
And oftentimes the relationship may not be one where you see each other every day like you did in high school, but your conversation starts where you left it the last time, even if it's a year later or so. And you sort of are happy to see each other, and the tales get longer, and the points you scored get more, and they rebound, and and if you have children, you're telling them tales, and they finally connect, and they realize that story you told them a long time ago was really this person, not you. And so all those connectors are sort of what makes it wonderful as you go from that one stage to the next. But it's that whole, you hope that they have the fortune to connect to someone else in their life, whether it's inside or outside of basketball, that helps them, understand how important it is.